My name is Mary F. Santos, and I am 30 years old. By the time I walked into that restaurant, it already felt like too much. Not because I had some dramatic premonition that my night would turn into a spectacle, but because of everything that had been piling up for years, quiet and constant. The way a ceiling leak becomes normal until you look up and realize the stain has spread across the whole room. My younger sister Melissa and her husband Kevin had turned needing me into a routine, and I had turned rescuing them into a reflex. It always began the same way, the careful, soft, open text, "Hey, sorry to bother you," followed by a problem that somehow ended with me opening my banking app. Rent was short, the car payment was due. The electricity company sent a shut-off notice. They'd had a rough month. Kevin's hours got cut. Melissa was stressed. And every time, I told myself family should have each other's backs, even when my back was the only one getting used. I wasn't rich. I wasn't some trust fund sister who threw money around without noticing. I worked. I budgeted. I skipped things. I said no to vacations and yes to overtime. I kept my life simple so theirs could stay afloat, because that was the role I drifted into so slowly I didn't even notice it becoming permanent. And the worst part wasn't the money, it was the assumption. The way a dinner out would end with my sister smiling sweetly while the check hovered on the edge of the table, waiting for the person who always picked it up. The way my mother would say, "You're just better with money," like that explained why I was the one who had to be responsible for everyone else's consequences. My boyfriend Ethan used to watch it happen in real time, the way my sister's small favors always expanded, the way Kevin's silence always meant he expected me to handle it. Ethan didn't hate them. He didn't speak badly about my family. He just asked questions I didn't want to answer, like why Melissa's emergencies always landed on my shoulders and why my mother acted like my boundaries were optional. I would brush it off and tell him it wasn't worth a fight, because I'd spent my whole life believing keeping the peace was the same thing as being loved. So when Melissa's 27th birthday came around, I told myself I was going to do something that felt purely generous, not obligated, not pressured, not transactional. I wanted her to feel special. I wanted, if I'm being honest, to feel special too, to feel like I could give a gift without it being mistaken for an installment payment on my place in the family. Melissa had been obsessing over this designer handbag for months, the kind she'd pull up on her phone and stare at like it was a dream you could touch. She'd talk about it at least 10 times, tracing the photo with her finger, sighing dramatically and saying she'd never buy something that expensive for herself. I knew she wouldn't. I also knew she didn't have to. Not when she had people who kept catching her before she ever hit the ground. I bought it anyway. $2,200. The number still makes my stomach tighten, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I could feel how much I was trying to buy with it. A moment of appreciation, a look on her face that told me I mattered. I walked into that restaurant holding the gift bag carefully, imagining her reaction, imagining the brief, bright spark of gratitude that would make all the quiet sacrifices feel less invisible. The family table was already full when I arrived. My father was deep in conversation with Kevin, laughing at something Kevin said as if Kevin hadn't spent half the last year avoiding steady work while Melissa called me about bills. Melissa's friends were loud, clustered around wine glasses, the kind of laughter that carries across a room. And my mother was sitting at the head of the table like she owned the place, wearing that smirk I've learned to dread, the one that always came right before a comment she considered clever, usually at someone else's expense. Ethan had offered to come with me, but Melissa had made a point of saying it was family only, which should have been my first clue that this night wasn't really about celebrating her. It was about reminding me where I stood. I scanned for my place card, expecting to see my name near my sister, near my parents, somewhere that said I belonged at this table. There was nothing. I looked again, confusion tightening my throat, until my eyes caught a small, wobbly table tucked away in the far corner of the room. It wasn't set like the rest. 2 booster seats, a few crayons rolling around, a laminated kids menu with a cartoon giraffe smiling too hard, and in the center of it all, a folded napkin with my name scribbled across it in thick black marker, like a joke so lazy they didn't even bother printing it. I stood there longer than I should have, because part of me genuinely believed there had to be some mistake, that someone would notice and fix it, that my mother would wave me over and laugh and say, "Oh, honey, of course not, sit here." But instead, my mother followed my gaze and said loud enough that half the restaurant could hear, "We thought it would be more fitting for you." There was laughter at the table. Not roaring, not cruelly obvious, but that low, satisfied kind that doesn't need volume to sting. Melissa's friends glanced toward me and then away, like they weren't sure whether they were supposed to join in. My father didn't even look up. Kevin smirked into his drink. And Melissa, the person I'd just spent $2,000 trying to make feel loved, stared at me with the tiniest twitch of a smile, like she was waiting to see if I'd play my part and swallow it. The heat that climbed up the back of my neck wasn't just embarrassment. It was something older, something I'd been forcing down for years. It was the realization that this wasn't random. This wasn't a harmless joke. This was a public little ritual designed to tell me I wasn't a guest of honor or a valued sister. I was the one who paid, the one who was useful, the one who could be placed wherever it was convenient, even at a kid's table, because my dignity wasn't part of the budget. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. Something in me went quiet and precise, the way it does right before you finally stop negotiating with reality. I walked to the main table, set the gift bag down in front of Melissa, and watched her hand reach toward it automatically, like she felt entitled to the reward even while I stood there humiliated. For a second, I let the bag sit there, heavy and beautiful, the exact thing she wanted, the exact thing I'd convinced myself would soften her. Then I picked it back up. "Consider this ungifted," I said, calm enough that my own voice surprised me. Melissa's smile snapped off her face like a mask being yanked away. My mother's smirk faltered. For the first time all night, my father looked up. Kevin's mouth opened like he wanted to say something and couldn't find the words fast enough. And I turned and walked away, not rushing, not stomping, just leaving with the kind of control I'd never been allowed to have in that family. I could feel eyes on me as I crossed the room, the kind of attention that only appears when you stop being compliant. The air outside was colder than I expected, and the streetlights made the pavement look slick even though it hadn't rained. I walked without a plan, just putting distance between myself and that table, between myself and the napkin that had my name written on it like an insult. My phone started buzzing before I'd even made it 3 blocks. Melissa's name lit up the screen, her contact photo from a barbecue years ago, where she was smiling into the camera like we were close. For half a second, I considered ignoring it. But old habits are stubborn. I'd answered her calls at 2 a.m. I'd answered her when she was crying about bills, when she was angry about Kevin, when she needed someone to fix what she didn't want to face. I answered this too. Her voice exploded through the speaker so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "What the hell was that?" she hissed. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You couldn't just take the joke? You had to make it about you on my birthday." She wasn't crying. Melissa never cried when she was angry. She sharpened her voice like a blade and started listing my sins, weaving them together like I'd planned this humiliation, like I'd staged a sabotage instead of simply refusing to swallow one more insult. She kept circling back to the same phrase, like it was the only thing that mattered. "You embarrass me." I stopped walking. I stood under a streetlight, listening to my own heartbeat, realizing how familiar her outrage felt and how unfamiliar my calm felt. When she finally paused to breathe, I said, "That's for not valuing the one who's always been there for you." There was a beat of silence, then a laugh, not soft, not understanding, but dismissive. The kind that says you're ridiculous for having feelings. "It was a joke," she said. "Mom thought it'd be funny. You're taking it way too seriously." I stared at the dark street in front of me and realized something with painful clarity. They weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because they believed I would take it, because they believed I would sit at the kids' table with a smile and still hand over the designer purse like tribute. In the background, I heard my mother's voice, sharp and commanding, telling Melissa to give her the phone. A second later, my mother was in my ear, already furious. "What is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You caused a scene over nothing. You walked out like a spoiled child, and you think that's okay?" "It's not nothing," I said, and my voice stayed flat because I refused to match her chaos. "It's years of me paying bills, covering gaps, helping Melissa and Kevin, and all I get in return is being treated like I don't belong at my own sister's birthday dinner." "You're acting like money makes you better than us," she shot back. "No," I said. "I'm saying I've been keeping this family from falling apart financially for years, and tonight made it clear how little that matters to you." There was a pause, the kind where she recalculates her approach. Then she called me dramatic. She said family jokes were what made us close. She said I was throwing everything away over a seating card. Melissa grabbed the phone back, her voice quieter now, but still hard. If you don't turn around and come back right now, don't bother talking to me again. I thought about the napkin, the booster seats, the smirk on my mother's face. I thought about every sorry to bother you message that ended with me paying something they swore was temporary. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. Okay, I said, and I hung up. I barely slept that night, not because I was replaying the napkin or the kids' table over and over, but because my body kept waiting for the next impact, like it had been trained to expect consequences whenever I said no. I kept hearing Melissa's voice in my head, the way she'd said I humiliated her, as if humiliation was something I'd done to her instead of something they had prepared for me like a centerpiece. Around 2 in the morning, I finally drifted off, and when I woke up, my phone looked like a battlefield. The first wave was my mother, text after text, swinging between guilt and anger so fast it felt manic. One message said, "You embarrassed your sister in front of everyone. Do you feel proud?" 2 minutes later, "You need to fix this before the family thinks you've lost it." Then, "I can't believe you'd do this on her birthday." There was a rhythm to it, like she was trying different keys on a ring until one unlocked me. When that didn't work, the relatives started pouring in. Aunt Linda, who always spoke like she was delivering a sermon about practicality, sent a long paragraph about how she didn't understand where my anger came from and how one bad seating arrangement shouldn't destroy a relationship. My cousin Paul chimed in with a smug message about how he'd heard I stormed out like a child over a harmless joke. Neither of them had been there, which was the point. They were responding to a version of the night someone else had already written for them, a version where I wasn't the woman who walked in holding a $2,200 gift after years of quietly paying bills, but the unstable one who couldn't take a joke. That was when it hit me, with a clarity that felt almost physical. My mother didn't just smirk at the table, she moved fast. While I was walking out into the cold, she was already telling her story. She'd turned me into the villain before my heels even hit the sidewalk outside the restaurant. In her story, Melissa was the wounded birthday girl, Kevin was the quiet husband trying to keep peace, and I was the dramatic sister who made everything about herself. It didn't matter that the joke had been designed to humiliate me. It didn't matter that I'd funded their lives for years. In their narrative, my help was invisible, and my boundary was a crime. My dad finally texted around mid-morning, which almost made me laugh, because he never texted unless it was important, and, in his mind, important meant, keep your mother calm. His message was short, almost dismissive. Your mom's upset. Just apologize and move on. Move on, like this was a minor misunderstanding and not the latest point in a pattern that had made me a walking wallet with a pulse. Then Melissa sent me a wall of text, and the longer I read it, the more my jaw tightened. She listed all the times I'd made her feel small, and every example she chose was tied to me helping her. The times I reminded her about the rent she promised she'd cover. The times I suggested Kevin pick up more hours. The times I asked when she planned to pay me back. Not because I needed repayment to survive, but because I needed to know whether she even respected the concept of obligation. In her mind, that wasn't honesty. It was me looking down on her. It was surreal watching her rewrite reality so she could stay the victim even while she was the one holding the knife. Ethan came over that afternoon with groceries and the kind of quiet concern that didn't try to fix me, just held space. He didn't lecture me about family. He didn't say I was overreacting. He set the bags down, took one look at my face, and said, "They planned it." Not a question, a statement. I nodded, and for a second my throat tightened because being believed without having to perform for it felt unfamiliar in the saddest way. I didn't answer anyone that day. I made coffee, sat on my couch, and watched the screen light up over and over. The family group chat was blowing up so fast I had to mute it. Every message carried the same undercurrent. I was wrong, Melissa was hurt, and it was my job to make it right. Not one person asked why my name was on a napkin at the kids' table. Not one person asked why my mother thought it was more fitting. They weren't confused. They were aligned. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years, not because it was healthy, but because I needed to see the truth in numbers so my emotions wouldn't get gaslit into fog. I opened an old spreadsheet buried in my laptop files, one I'd started years ago when I realized I was sending Melissa and Kevin money. So often I was losing track. I'd stopped updating it at some point because the totals made me feel stupid, like I was sponsoring a life that had no intention of changing. That night, I finished it. I went through bank statements, Venmo histories, old texts where Melissa said, "I'll pay you back next week," and Kevin wrote nothing at all. Rent help, utilities, car repairs. Just until Friday. "We're short this month. Please don't tell Mom." I didn't even count the small things. Dinners I paid for without mentioning. Grocery runs I covered because Melissa's card was acting up. The surprise payments to keep their lights on. 2 hours later, the total stared back at me like an accusation. It wasn't generosity anymore. It was sponsorship. And the feeling that rose in me wasn't just anger. It was clarity, so sharp it almost felt peaceful. I had been funding a lifestyle they had no intention of outgrowing, and they still thought I deserved a napkin at the kids' table. I typed one message into the main family chat, short enough that it couldn't be twisted into drama. "Taking a break from the family for a while. Please don't contact me unless it's a real emergency." No explanations, no debates, no pleading for understanding from people committed to misunderstanding me. Then I turned my phone off completely, the way you shut down a machine that keeps overheating, and I went to bed hoping the silence would finally arrive. The next morning proved I had underestimated my mother's capacity to escalate. I walked into work like any other day, coffee in hand, trying to keep my face neutral. By 9:30, my manager called me into her office and shut the door behind me, which she almost never does. She turned her monitor toward me, and I felt my stomach drop before I even read the words. An email sent from a generic Gmail address, no name attached, claiming I had been displaying erratic behavior in public, that I had stormed out of a dinner in a fit of rage, and that for everyone's safety the company might want to keep an eye on me. It was written like concern, but it read like sabotage. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The phrasing was too familiar, the careful way it painted me as unstable without directly accusing me, the way it tried to plant doubt while pretending to be helpful. It was my mother's voice on the screen. I told my manager there was a personal family issue and that it would not affect my work. I told her the email wasn't based in reality. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly and said she believed me, but she wanted me to be mindful of how perception spreads. I walked out of her office with my coffee cold, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from a new kind of anger that felt cleaner than sadness. This wasn't about a birthday dinner anymore. This was my mother reaching into the one part of my life she hadn't controlled and trying to poison it. That night, I didn't just mute chats. I blocked everyone. Melissa, Kevin, my mother, my father, the aunts and cousins who'd decided I was wrong before they even asked what happened. I deleted the family group entirely from my phone like I was clearing a wound of something infected. I sat in the quiet afterward and felt the strange shock of peace begin to settle, and beneath it, a warning I couldn't ignore. With my family, silence never meant surrender. Silence meant they were planning the next move. For 3 days after I blocked everyone, nothing happened. No calls slipped through. No surprise emails. No vague, just checking in messages from cousins pretending to be neutral. The quiet felt unreal, like the moment after a fire alarm stops ringing when your ears are still buzzing and you're not sure if it's actually over. I kept my phone nearby out of reflex, even though there was no one left who could reach me. Each evening, I waited for the familiar spike of anxiety that usually came with sunset, the sense that some new problem was about to land in my lap. It didn't come, and that was when I realized how much of my daily tension had been manufactured by them. On the fourth morning, the knock came. It was just after 9, a cold Saturday, the kind of morning I usually spent catching up on laundry and pretending the world could wait. The pounding at my door was sharp and deliberate, too loud for the hour, the kind of knock that wasn't asking permission so much as announcing ownership. I froze with my coffee mug halfway to my lips, listening. 3 more hard knocks followed, then a pause, like whoever was out there expected me to rush to comply. I stepped quietly to the peephole. It was my mother. Her hair was done perfectly, coat buttoned all the way up, posture rigid like she was headed into a meeting she planned to dominate. Clutched under her arm was a thick manila folder, the kind people carry when they want their words to feel official. Standing just behind her, leaning against the railing like this was a casual errand, was Kevin. He was scrolling on his phone, expression bored, like he wasn't part of the reason this moment existed. I didn't open the door. Instead, I spoke through it. What do you want?" My mother's voice shifted instantly into something too bright, too smooth. She said she wanted to talk like adults and end the nonsense before it went any further. I told her there was nothing to talk about, that I'd been clear, that I didn't want contact. That was when her tone snapped into something colder. She said she'd been in touch with people who deserved to know the truth about me, and that she could make things very difficult if I didn't drop my attitude. I told her to leave. She didn't. Instead, she bent down and slid the manila folder under my door, the edge scraping softly against the floor like a threat disguised as paper. When I picked it up and opened it, my stomach twisted. Inside were printed screenshots of old text messages between me and Melissa, carefully selected, stripped of context, arranged to tell a story where I looked controlling, cold, obsessed with money. Messages where I asked when she planned to pay me back, where I mentioned bills, where I suggested Kevin pick up more hours. No screenshots of her begging me to help. No midnight panic texts. No promises she'd made and broken. Just enough to make me look like the villain if someone wanted to believe it. I understood immediately what my mother was doing. She wasn't trying to reconcile. She was building a file. If she had these printed, that meant she was already showing them to people, already laying groundwork, already rewriting history, while I stood on the other side of a locked door. I slid the folder back under the door without a word. Outside, Kevin let out a low chuckle, the sound of someone who had never been held accountable for anything in his life. My mother told me I was throwing away the only people who cared about me, and that one day I'd regret it. They knocked once more, hard, then finally walked away. I stood at my window and watched them get into their car. My mother didn't look angry. She looked satisfied, like she believed she'd planted doubt in me that would eventually pull me back into their orbit. She was wrong. If anything, watching her escalate like that, dragging my private life into something calculated and malicious, snapped the last thread of hesitation I still had. This wasn't a break. This was a cutoff. That afternoon, I made a list. Every possible way they could still reach me, every thread that tied me to them. It was longer than I expected. Old group chats I'd forgotten about, shared email threads, even a streaming account I'd been paying for without realizing it was still logged in at their house. I started with my phone. I changed my number, something I'd always resisted because it felt too final. The relief afterward was immediate, like pulling the batteries out of a smoke alarm that had been screaming for years. Next came email. Filter set to auto-delete anything from their addresses. Social media locked down, unfollowed, blocked. Privacy settings tightened until only people I trusted could see me exist. Then the financial side. I closed the account I'd opened years ago to make it easier to send Melissa money. I went through my banking app line by line, canceling auto payments I'd forgotten about, Kevin's cloud storage subscription, a shared phone plan, random little expenses that added up to proof of how deeply I'd been embedded in their lives. By evening, I realized I'd done something I hadn't done in years. I'd made my life mine again. But I also knew it wasn't over. My mother doesn't accept closed doors. She looks for windows. So I placed a fraud alert on my credit, set up identity monitoring, and scheduled a consultation with a lawyer about harassment documentation. The lawyer told me it wasn't enough yet for a restraining order, but to document everything. So I started a file. A few days later, my cousin Ava, one of the only relatives who hadn't chosen a side, reached out. She said my mom was telling people I'd abandoned the family over a seeding joke and cut them off financially out of spite. Ava asked if I wanted her to correct the story. I told her not to bother. The truth doesn't need defending to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. A week after my mother's visit, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. The envelope was thick. I didn't open it. I put it in a drawer with the rest of the evidence, sealed and untouched. Whatever was inside, apology, threat, performance, the goal would be the same. Pull me back in. The silence after that was total. No knocks, no emails to my boss, no blocked number calls in the middle of the night. It would have been easy to believe it meant peace, but I've known my family too long for that illusion. Silence with them never means surrender. It means planning. The silence lasted just long enough to feel intentional. About a month passed after I shut every door I could find, long enough for my body to stop racing when my phone buzzed, long enough for my evenings to feel like mine again. I cooked without rushing. I slept without waiting for a late-night crisis. Ethan and I started talking about things that weren't emergencies or family damage control. Normal things, plans, trips we might take, furniture we didn't have to choose based on how durable it would be for someone else's chaos. That was when the hook came. It was a Tuesday evening. I was walking home from work with a grocery bag cutting into my fingers, already thinking about dinner, when I noticed a dark SUV idling across the street from my building. I wouldn't have thought twice about it if the driver's window hadn't rolled down the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk. Kevin leaned out like we were old friends running into each other by accident. "Mary," he said, grinning, "thought I'd catch you before you went inside." My stomach dropped, but my face stayed still. I told him I wasn't interested in talking and kept walking. That's when he said it. "Melissa's pregnant." I stopped. Not because I cared about the news itself, but because I knew exactly why he'd led with it. Babies are leverage in my family. Babies soften voices, rewrite histories, excuse everything that came before. Babies are how they pretend the past never happened. Kevin launched into it without waiting for a response. He said Melissa was nervous, emotional, that she wanted things to be different this time, that families should be together for moments like this. He talked about how the baby deserved to know its aunt, and then, like clockwork, the sentence arrived dressed up as concern. "She thought maybe you'd want to help get things ready, like you always have before." There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, an invoice disguised as sentiment. I told him congratulations and said nothing had changed. He tried to keep smiling, but the edges of it cracked. Before I could walk away, he added, "You don't want this kid growing up thinking you're the kind of woman who turns her back on family, do you?" I didn't answer. I walked past him, through the building door, and let it lock behind me. The next morning, my cousin Ava texted. She said she'd overheard my mother at a baby shower, telling people I was already planning to set up a college fund for the baby. My name hadn't come up in the same sentence as congratulations. Only money. Only expectation. That's when it became clear. The pregnancy wasn't an olive branch. It was a battering ram. Ethan asked me that night if I was okay. I told him the truth. "They think a baby will reset the board." He nodded slowly and said, "Then they don't know you at all." But I knew them, and I knew this wasn't the last attempt.